listening to our dad on the Jim Cressman podcast.
It's been a long time coming, but I'm thrilled to have my old friend, Nick Meinema. We've known each other for about 2 decades now. And Nick, you have launched Action Entertainment Collaborative. We got so many stories to tell and so much stuff to cover, and I almost wish we were both drunk because this would be even more fun. One of those conversations. That's something to be captured.
Yeah, I just came from a lunch, so you're saying that I'm not drunk.
Yeah, I guess I'm making an assumption I probably shouldn't, but give us a little rundown. You're running your own agency now, and you've partnered with Trace Adkins manager Greg Baker to get this thing going. And give us a little rundown of what it is and how it came about. And I'm so excited for you. It's really cool to see this up and running.
Well, the joke is, it turns out I'm not that great at working for other people. That's the joke. But I had a great experience and a great time at the Agency Group, and then we were bought by UTA. And I was about 6 years there. And what just came to be is we had different visions for what the future was going to be. And I'm very much brick and mortar, and I want to do things my own way. And I feel like there's a success rate to that.
What do you mean by brick and mortar?
I really enjoy the work. I love the non-fancy part of it. Like I don't know if it's 96 or 97, but like Jerry Maguire, like we're the elbow, right? We know each other. You have other facets of your business, and I'm starting to grow other facets of mine, and we started as agents, right? And I'm still primarily an agent, and we're supposed to be the elbow in the photograph, right? We're behind the scenes, and I think that's the brick and mortar part of it, right? The part that allows the clients or the opportunity to shine, and you're the deal maker behind it. And that's not saying that either one of my former employers don't, but it's my primary focus.
Right.
And I think it just ran its course, and not just for me, but for them as well. And there was a bunch of opportunities that came my way as soon as it was known and announced that I was no longer there. And all of them had me working for somebody. And I didn't really realize how much I didn't want to do that until I started turning down really fruitful, financially rewarding offers. And through conversations that we were having about client retention, kind of came up with this scenario of, I want to do things more boutique. I use the word brick and mortar. Hopefully it's appropriate. But, real hands-on, that Jerry Maguire, less clients, more attention.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be on the front lines again. And I wasn't. I was in Canada. But, what I found out of this experience is there's so many promoters that I worked with through the territorial system at UTA and the Agency Group that knew me and I knew them. But we didn't really do business together. There was a territorial agent in between us. And that is now ceased. And I really have enjoyed those relationships, and I think they have as well. When you deal with somebody one-on-one, it's completely different than dealing with somebody, no matter who it is, in the middle. And so the management side of the company came from, I really enjoy working with Greg Baker, who started as Trace's bass player and then his tour manager, and through just hard work, grit, smart decision making, and being able to speak to an artist. Elevated to management when I took Trace on when I was at UTA. And we just really enjoy working together. And he was looking to build his business, and I was looking to start and build mine. And so it was just a natural thing. And then there's a consulting company that also exists that's, really outside of the music business, more in the real estate land business.
Right. And so that's to give you the ability to help some of your clients potentially invest some of their money?
No. We do land and housing deals together, and we thought, why separate that company that we already have?
Okay.
Bring it in all in. So,
okay.
Now I said no hastily there. The reality is there very much could be opportunities for clients. As a matter of fact, we're in the middle of one now, but it's more a partnership than something that we brought.
So you've had a really unique vantage point because you're a pillar in the Canadian country music industry and in the Canadian music industry altogether. You've been in Nashville now for over a decade. You've been able to work at a world-class level in a high-performance business while still keeping a finger on the pulse of everything that's going on in Canada. In your estimation, from where you sit, what has the Canadian country music industry been doing right over the last 5 years, and where are we still fucking up?
Well, I always have continued to believe that I'm a part of that. I have a different arm length because of being here in Nashville, and I've grown an American and worldwide business while never letting go of where my roots were. And I think what has been done right is the challenge that existed for some, not all artists, was the community is smaller, and there is a lot of help in Canada, and you can justify success quickly. And I don't think there was as much. Now, there was times during this time that I'm going to talk about where there was, Charlie Major's record, right? Like, that's a pillar record of the country music community, not Canada. That record is foolproof top to bottom, and there are examples of that. So I preface it by saying there's exception to these rules. What I think the Canadian country business has done really, really well over the past 10 years is identify the fact that the format is not Canadian, it's an American format, and that the challenge of making sure that the songs are top quality, not Canadian top quality. And I think, with CanCon and the way that things worked, there were some songs, some artists that snuck through the sniff test that they don't sneak through anymore. And I think that realm has become tighter. And I think within that tight community it's gone to the best song wins. There's still clunkers. There's always going to be clunkers. But the reality of it is, I think the music and the production and the entrepreneurialism, if you will, of the creators has gotten way better over the past 10 years. Again, not discounting Michelle Wright, but again, on Arista, U.S. songs, U.S. players.
She had a #1 in the U.S.
She had a #1,
right? With "Take It Like a Man" back in the day.
So 16 was a big hit, and so and Prairie Oyster and Pat Conroy, they had that success. Those were the exceptions to the rule. But there became a cottage business. It has now become part of the actual business. I remember seeing Charlie at the Center in the Square, which we've talked about, and I've mentioned to him, likely to a nauseam. But when I do see him, it's like, I remember that show, going with my stepmom, and we just loved it. And Alison Krauss opened up the show. I still have the ticket, and Terri Clark playing the amphitheater. I think it was in '96. She ended up giving me one of the tour shirts for Christmas a couple of years ago. And David Lee Murphy was the opening act with Dust on the Bottle. And I think it started to change during that time, but it really got executed. A lot of that was you working and SAC with putting the Canadians on the front of the American tours. But now we're seeing Americans going on front of the Canadians. And I think that is all kind of cultivated into this. I've always hated the word Canadian country. There's not German country. There's not Australian country. There's not even American country. It's country music that is made by a Canadian artist. Nobody calls Shania Twain Canadian country, right? But she's just as much Canadian and just as much from there as an artist who does not have a deal in America. And it's always been a problem for me. And it's met with opposition. When I was on the CCMA board, it's the Canadian Country Music Association. And I had no problem with that, but I had a problem with calling the music Canadian country music, because I think that puts a grade on it that automatically puts it in a category which is not where it's from. And I think that has been some of the struggle as well.
So you're talking about the origin of country music itself and the fact that it's an American art form that was really co-opted or even hijacked by other countries who also had rural roots and folk sensibilities in their music, but wanted to define it under this banner.
Yeah, I think it's a little less about where it was, where it started from and it being an American format. It's more about, you don't go to Des Moines, Iowa to become a movie actor. right? That's not where you go, right? It
You go to
doesn't mean
LA.
that you can't be in a movie in Des Moines, you can't be in a commercial, you can't be on television. But what it means is you're not in the business, until you're where that is made. Well, country music primarily, with the exception of a few, is made here in Nashville. It's where the songwriters are, it's where the studios are, it's where the machine, for good or for bad, it's where the machine is. And I think the competition, if the word competition is the right word, but the competition that exists for artists here, I think makes them better. And I think Canadian artists, Canadian living artists, people who live in Canada, some of them split their time between, some of them live here. I think, it's the difference between the CFL and the NFL. It doesn't mean that going to a CFL game, and I'm sure people in Saskatchewan will be really pissed off to hear that, but, it's a different game. But I don't think there's very few CFL players who go, you know what, I just don't want to play in the NFL, right? I just don't think that exists to very many. And I think, it's still a high caliber. It still has a large fan base. But I'm pretty sure whoever runs the CFL would feel the same way. It's like, I'd love to be running the NFL.
Right. I think the Canadian content regulations, the 35% factors into this conversation as well, or it's relatable to it because, when Stan Cleese came up with that concept and he integrated it with the CRTC in 1971, it gave birth essentially to a Canadian music industry. There were studios, writers, agents, managers, promoters. Like it really helped develop the industry in Canada. But in some ways, and you and I have spoken about this many a time, it's held the top end of our industry down because we still have this distinction at radio between an American power current and a Canadian power current. And even though radio, and I do applaud them, they have stepped up, prioritized Canadian artists more so than at any point in history, and there's more number ones. They still have this distinction of Canadian and American, and I think that's one of the last nuts we need to crack if we're going to compete on a global marketplace. And I just wonder how much Canadian content hurts or helps that case.
I think it was, like most things, a great idea in its infancy. And then just like everything, it gets skewed and watered down. And I think in its infancy, it was fantastic. But the core belief of why that came into place when Stan was developing and implementing that into the system, that changed along the way. It became, you must play a this amount, but then it became the maximum, not the minimum, right?
Right. I think Stompin Tom had a quote about that at some point.
And I was trying to think that I didn't get it. It was like, it's not a maximum, it's a minimum. And I think it's taken, the place of, okay, well, it's the starter fund, right? Like you go in and whether it's a starting company or whatever it is, you get feeding money, right? You start it and then it starts to build, yes. And then it's a different company 10 years down the road than it was, when it started, because with all intents and purposes, hopefully it grew. And again, I think I don't even think it's necessarily a bad thing, but I think it does hold back, I think it's Canadian, like country music, or, they don't call it Canadian rock, do they? I don't think so. And if they do, it's not nearly as widely used as Canadian country. And I think there is a Canadian rock scene, right? Like we've talked about this too. There's bands that, like Tragically Hip, for example, that crush it in Canada and played arenas back when Gord was still alive, but couldn't really get arrested other than in some border states. Canadiana. I think there's a difference between, like I think a hip hop artist, they write songs about what they know, right? And that's the musicality of it. That's the lyric. That's the positioning of the creator. But it is Canadiana. It's not Canadian rock, and it
right.
has been.
The culture supersedes the geographic location of the artist, right? It's like, especially in hip hop, especially in country music, it's like country music sensibilities are universal. Doesn't matter if it's a country song in Australia, or by an artist who was born in Australia, Canadian or otherwise.
I totally agree. Where it breaks down for me is, I've been really fortunate. It's been one of the real blessings of the last 10 years of living here, of not people in the music business, but like when you live in a neighborhood, you meet neighbors. And, I've turned people on to Blue Rodeo, and I've turned people on to the Tragically Hip and Great Big Sea and Alan Doyle, right? And of course the country stuff as well. But, Blue Rodeo is just a great band, right? They might sing about more Canadian aspect leaning, things that are going on in the world. But, they've also sung about world events, and, it can it can happen to you. Is it happened to you, or it can happen to me, years ago? It's like, it's about raids. It can happen to you. I believe that Jim wrote that about like some police raids in New York City. It's like, it's still a Canadian's point of view of it, but I don't think that's a Canadian band. They're a band who's from Canada. And I think that's the proud part about it, is when those artists have success here, right? And, you've worked with Emerson Drive, I work with Terri Clark, the list, what's going on with Tennille and Lindsay and Megan right now. And, Dallas just signed with Big Loud down here. Nobody here, I believe, as fans, says, oh, Shania Twain's Canadian? Oh, so-and-so's Canadian? No, they either like it or they don't. Maybe the business here in Nashville might lean itself to, if there's an elephant in the room, oh, it's Canadian, there's an accent, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't think the fan, it's either good or bad, and it's good or bad to their ears. And I just, we're trotting on the same subject, but I think, be proud to be Canadian and have the lyrics speak to that, but don't define yourself as, a Canadian broadcaster. I know there's a Canadian broadcasting company, but like, you're a broadcaster. Like, was Peter Mansbridge a Canadian news anchor? No, he was a news anchor on a Canadian network. I feel that there's an important definition in there that allows for it to not have an excuse, right? It's good. It's great.
I think your argument is more substantiated by the globalization of the business, partly due to streaming, partly due to the fact that borders are sort of coming down, somewhat between formats too, but, especially geographically. It's like you can have that success story. But you pointed to something that's interesting, and I've always wondered this. Do you think there is a bias, conscious or unconscious, against signing Canadians in Nashville? I mean, you've just rattled off a bunch of examples, obviously, of people who have just gotten deals. But by and large, do you think that it works against an artist to not be from the American country music ecosystem trying to get a deal in Nashville?
No more than being from Australia or Washington State. Where I think the challenges is they're not uninhibited. So many Canadian artists have Canadian deals. And it very rarely, if ever, has worked where in country, not in other formats, a domestic Canadian artist is signed and then liaisoned into, for whatever the reasoning is, the American powerhouse partner. And that might be a coincidence, but it's hard to think that it can be, right?
I think it's math. I think it's the available percentages that the American label can make on that artist if it's upstream from their Canadian subsidiary versus if they sign that artist directly.
Think that, there is a part of the business that you want to claim it as your own, especially, in this town and in this format. I think, if it's already, and I'll preface this by saying, I don't think there's a bias. I think, there's a lot of money and time and effort and infrastructure that goes into breaking an artist. And I don't think any more Canadian is shut down than any more kid from Illinois or Washington State or Oregon. So I stated at that. What we have done a horrible job of as a community in Canada is we say, well, so-and-so is the biggest name in Canada, right? Or they're the vocalist of the year, or they've won this or they've won that. And then you look at the true data of the country supporting. So what does the number one artist in Canada in country music, as opposed to a B-level, maybe even C-level American artist, get in time, radio play, infrastructure, ticket selling, right? And that's there's only one community to blame for that, and that's the country community, right? It doesn't happen in other formats, right? You clearly see in rock, you mentioned the Tragically Hip, but you've got the Arkells. I'm blanking on the name, and right now, it'll come to me. Jason Murray manages them. I'm just blanking on it. Glorious Sons. There we go. Glorious Sons.
Glorious Sons, yeah.
You know, huge arena rock bands, right? Building in other territories, but they're bigger there than they are anywhere else, and they're on par, if not larger, than artists that have had the same likeness of success in their own home countries. There are so few exceptions to the rule in country, we could list them off on one hand, that have an American size business in Canada that reflects the profile of their career. And I think that is, you know, guys like you and I think that's the managers. I think it's the labels. I think it's radio. But I also think, you know, it's the way that it's projected to fans. That's where the Canadian country thing goes in, right? It's like giving somebody a justification to go, oh, but they're Canadian. Well, that's a great thing. That's a fabulous, right? And I've always have felt that when it's tied into music, not the Canadiana of it, but the branding of the music, it gives the audience to go, oh, well, that's not American. They're not going to be on the CMAs. They're not in the ACMs. They don't do Ryan and Kelly in the morning. I don't see them in People magazine, right? And so when we see Canadians getting those opportunities, Paul Brandt had them, Terri Clark had them, of course, Shania had them, you know, Tenille, and go down the list now of artists who are getting that. There's a borderless thing that exists because there's just different visibilities to it. And I think that's been a harp of mine and a stump argument for a very long time is, you know, why don't we treat these artists as if they are, so that we can show the data to go, no, look at it. Because the same argument cannot be said here. If you have an artist that's blowing up in the Southeast or the Northwest or wherever it is, all the labels in town, all the managers in town, all the agencies are going to know about Kane Brown and know about Luke Combs as they're starting to manifest themselves regionally. Well, if you take any one of those artists, right, and put the data that the Canadian artists have while they were emerging, there's no comparison. The Canadian artist has more data. But how does that translate? It's how we treat them, right? And I've said this for years, and it's very unpopular. The fact that the Junos very rarely have country on it is disgusting. I've always said it. I've argued with everybody who will argue with me on it. Oh, well, you have the Canadian Country Music Awards. Yeah, the Grammys put country on, and we have the ACMs, we have the CMTs, we have the CMA. There is a side of this business and this format that is discounted in Canada, and I've always found it disgusting.
Yeah, some sort of insecurity, you know, an inability to present ourselves in the light that, you know, is warranted by some of the stats, which can be impressive in this business.
Yes, like if you look at, without naming names, some of the artists that we work with, they do triple, quadruple the business on the road that regular appearance of artists on the Junos. And I'm not discounting anybody that plays on it. You're on it. You've made it to a level and you deserve that spot. But to discount a whole format, or we think it's such a victory. Jim, you brought up something earlier. Number ones in Canada were few and far between by Canadian artists, right? Now they become more regularly, and that's rightfully so, right? We all celebrate when Dallas or Megan or somebody gets on the broadcast of the Junos because it's so unordinary for it to happen. And that shouldn't be the case. And it is. But that's the national, you know, music award. and our format, which takes up a great percentage of the percentage of music listeners and concert goers and radio in Canada and streaming numbers. And in most cases, they're discounted and largely ignored, discounted,
largely ignored.
And I think that's not calling anybody who makes those decisions into question. It's again us as an industry going, no. We're way more significant than you're giving it credit to, right? And I don't have the answers to all of it, but what I know is I've been at the shows. I've seen 20,000 people in a field at Big Valley Jamboree singing every word to an artist that has a record and a half out that is only known in Canada. I've seen it. I've seen it from one end of the country to the other. There's a real fan base here, and that not only to the fan base, but I largely the artists are discounted on the full media spectrum and the full industry spectrum in the Canadian business. And I'm sure that's very unpopular to say. I haven't lived there in 10 years. And there has been movement for sure, right? Like it's not the way that it was when I left 10 years ago. But I've always said that this is not a discounted format. And for so much of it, it is discounted up there. And the artists are fantastic. The fans are fantastic. We just need more people to know about it.
So two things there. One point, I think you're right. I think that the Junos and CARAS as an organization is very much about mandating inclusivity and diversity. And so it's interesting to see that they've eschewed the country music format, which has so much power and reverence and respect from fans in that market. It's like, well, if you're about diversity, let's make sure we have diversity of sound on the show, not necessarily just cultural diversity. I think that can be defined in multiple different ways. So I think that's one point. But the question is, what's the answer? Do we just need to advocate harder? Do we need to present better cases? I mean, how do we get around this? Because it's one thing to point out a problem, but one thing I've always admired, and I know this from experience in dealing with you, is that generally if you come to me with a problem in one hand, you come with a solution in the other. So what is the solution to this?
I think it is being advocates. I think it is learning how to say no to opportunities because they are given at a here you go level. I think there's some of that, but also I think if you asked me the question 5 years ago, Jim, I'd have a different answer for you. I bring up the Junos because it's been, an issue of mine for years and years and years. I don't think that's as much of an issue moving forward. I think, award shows are going to have to, the numbers are speaking for themselves. Like they're going to have to redefine what they are. And until we know what they are, I don't know how we advocate more. But, I've got an 18-year-old niece and an 8-year-old son, and they both are very similar in the way that they listen to music and very similar on their likes and dislikes. There is no critic or award that will get my 18-year-old niece to listen to anything or watch anything. It's if a friend of hers likes it, if she's heard about it, it's trending, whatever. And I got an 8-year-old boy. They couldn't be further apart in where they're at in their lives, 10 years, boy, girl. And the reality of it is he's the exact same way. So I think culturally, as a people worldwide, there's less and less meaning to the word best. I listen to Joe Rogan's podcast all the time, and although they're 3 hours long, so when I say all the time, you've got to put some real effort into it. But when I do, like I remember him going on there's no best comedy award, right? There might be best touring comedy. There's no best joke because there is no such thing as a best joke. And award shows were developed for promotion. What is best? What is the best male this, the best that? We all know how those things work, right? They're voted on by large committees. They are, for the most case, not biased. And very rarely is it something where it is uniformed, right? Even fan voted awards, right? Some fan bases are more active than others, right? how could Garth Brooks ever not win Entertainer of the Year? The guy goes on sale and he sells out multiple football stadiums. He's Entertainer of the Year. But that doesn't work like that. He wouldn't likely want it that way. And I'm not speaking for him or them at all. But what does best mean, right? Showcasing, right? And I think it's finding a way, to get the music and the word out. And I'm just not sure what being the best or the award winner is going to mean in the foreseeable future. And I could be wrong. I've been wrong about lots of things. To quote Ralph James, not often and not lately, but the reality is, I think the answer would be very different 5 years ago. I don't have how do you fix that problem? Because I unfortunately don't think it matters.
Well, you might be right. We might be worrying about repairing a hot dog stand on the Titanic. You know what I mean? Like, it could be all just a moot point at some point.
Everybody's redefining what they are. Like when we were in the middle of this pandemic, I would hear people say, there might never be live shows again. They're all going to be virtual. I'm like, I don't think I'm that old, but I was like, I'm bullshit. And people talk about VR, and it will likely have a place. But I think what we've all learned out of this is there's a place for technology. There's a place for it. But nothing.
But there's also a place for reality, for connection, for humanity.
I think we have found, when you read reports of the mental dismay of people when they've been locked away, when they haven't been able to communicate, they haven't been able to touch, they haven't been able to hug. So weird that we're in a time where, so many people haven't been able to do something that really you took for granted. And I think, as much as technology played a significant role in keeping artists active and creating some income and giving the fans new access that they wouldn't have had in all different genres, the reality of it is, I don't know anybody that doesn't miss going to a show and hearing the roar of a crowd, going to see a comedian and hearing the laughter. Yes, it's a pain in the ass to scan your ticket. Yes, the popcorn is overpriced. All of the things. But there is something to that experience that you can't get in front of this. I would much rather be having this conversation with you in person, right? Logistically, it's not possible now. But I'd much rather be doing this in person, right? Because it would be different. If we did this exact same thing in person, this conversation would be different. And I think that's what we've learned out of the last 18 months is, we can try to put a Band-Aid on it all we want. There's something about a community showing up, everybody coming from different places to enjoy something that, I didn't know that you like that, or, oh, wow, and the experience of it. I think that is unique. And I think it's going to be, as long as we can, and we meaning, as a people, figure out the economics of moving forward. So many people are hurting and won't recover in a timely fashion. And financially, you need the money to experience these things. And I'm not casting over that quickly, but the true reality is, people want to go to concerts. They want to go to sporting events. They want to go to see comedians play. They want to go to festivals. They want to go do those things. And I think if there's a small silver lining to what we've all been through is, I think we as an industry might have taken for granted that it was always going to be there. And I think hopefully, a fan who, lives in an area that they get multiple shows, multiple kinds of, I'll see him next time. Well, we just learned that next time might not happen. We lost some great artists, some to COVID, some for other reasons, and they won't be seen live again. And hopefully that brings the two communities together in a way that, we don't discount each other, and you and I have talked about this 100 times. And, there are two parts of the live business that are the most important. The first one are the fans, and the second one is the artist. And we don't always get it in that order. Sometimes on the business side of things, we don't need to get into here. We artist. Well, who is the end receiver of that is the fan. And the most important person is the fan. For if they don't show up, there's nothing to see. And they
Yeah, we're in the customer service business, whether we want to be or not, and we are in the provision of value service, whether we want to be or not.
The artist without the artist, there is no fan to show up. It's the chicken before the egg thing. But I do think that from the conversations that I have with friends, with family, with colleagues, with people in the business, I think we all gotta, whoa, never did I ever think that was going to happen, and there's movies been made about it. I don't like those kind of movies, and now I know why, because it's scary shit.
Yeah, definitely. Because they're a horror show on a whole other level for people in our business.
Some of those movies about pandemics and the world shutting down, you go, I don't want to see that. And then you realize oh my goodness, it's like the National Enquirer. You see a movie 7-8 years removed and you go, oh my goodness, like the technology in a spy movie, what can they actually see and what can they hear? Because, there's no telling, besides the Jetsons and us not being able to fly in cars in the air, everything else just kind of came true.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you're a Canadian guy with Canadian family ties still, living in a Republican state, watching all of this go down. What was it like for you living to a degree one way in Nashville? I think Nashville's a Democratic-run city, though, correct?
Yeah.
Is it a Democratic mayor?
Democratic mayor,
right.
Right. Most places in America, the city is is Democratic and the more rural areas.
Right, Republican.
And if a lot of the wealthy areas as well, lean Republican. At least in my experience, it was really hard, right? One, I'm not a citizen yet, so I couldn't vote. So the good news is in the argument, whenever that would happen, I go, Canadian, I can't vote yet. So that was a little bit of way of diffusing some of it. But I think most people that I know that lean Republican fiscally and Democrat socially, right? But that doesn't exist. And so when you get down past the fodder, past news, past Twitter, past all of the stuff, and you get down to real conversations with human beings, the news will show two people fighting in their neighborhood, one over a blue sign and one over a red sign. And yes, those things happen. But the reality of it is, as I would say to my dad or, the people that I would be talking to at the height of the hysteria, is go to the grocery store, take my kid to baseball, go out, eat dinner, whatever it is. The reality of it is everyday life is not as affected as the news and social media will have you believe it is,
Couldn't agree more. At the end of the day, it comes down to relationships between people, interpersonal relationships. And if we all can keep cool heads, then we can all navigate whatever's coming in the future. But I should have refined the question better. You saw lockdowns, shutdowns in Canada. You saw Ontario get locked down again. But you guys are wide open in Nashville. Texas has been wide open for a couple of months. Florida's been wide open. What was it like for you from that perspective as you're dealing and talking to your Canadian family who are seeing such a different approach on behalf of administrators and government versus what was happening where you were living, and then, comparing the two and the loss of liberties and the on the other side of the argument, the fact that a lot of people think that a lot of these Republican states were very, that they were reckless. And there's some validity to that. But at the end of the day, it must have been a really unique experience for you because you're calling your parents or your family, in Canada, and that's a different conversation than what you're seeing every day when you're out and no one's wearing masks and you're at restaurants and life is pretty normal.
Well, to be clear, masks were mandatory until a little while ago. Tennessee was one of the...
About a month ago, right?
Yeah, but I don't know anybody who's not vaccinated.
Yes.
And by vaccinated, I mean double vaccinated, or they had the Johnson. I don't come into contact. I don't know really anybody outside of people who don't want to get the vaccination. I don't know anybody who's not vaccinated. And so I love that you position the question that way, because the reality of it is I don't think we were reckless. I was in Texas twice during the time, but I was here most of the time. And I don't think we were reckless. You know, there were
The numbers don't seem to indicate that you were.
Well, as a
Right.
matter of fact, the numbers indicate that, you know, we weren't at all, you know, and, you know, we had to make a decision, you know, as a family on whether we were sending our kids back to school. It was an easy decision. One, because every day we weren't pounded on the news that if you send your kid back to school, you're a horrible parent. Thank goodness. And the other thing is we had a school board that sent us data and said, these are the two options and you can choose which one it is. And if it ever gets to this spot, this is what we're going to do. And so to really answer your question, you know, it was really hard because it was a conversation with friends, with you know, people in the business, family, where for so long I was being called, oh, you're being reckless and you're doing this in personal conversations, and the true reality, it was like, nobody's telling me I need to go out. Nobody, you know, and that was the part of the argument that was never made clear. It's like, it didn't say that you had to go to a restaurant. It didn't say that you had to send your kids to school. And most importantly, and this is the part that get missed fucking everywhere, is nobody said you had to go to the office. What they said is you have a choice. If you want to, and these protocols are in place, we're going to allow you to do that. And, you know, it's part of America that I love, which is, you know, they don't just, sorry, I got to say this right. It's not just believed because it's said. Now that's in contradiction to some people just believe everything that's said out of one whistle, and some people believe, you know, but that's fodder and Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and real living people in a neighborhood walking their dogs. You know, as was coined by my next door neighbor, he said, and a stark Republican. He said, but in this situation, I'm not right or left. I'm looking right or left. I look to my left. I look to my right, and I see what's going on in my own neighborhood. And I make the decision for my own neighborhood, for my own community, for my own children. And that's the decision I'm going to make. And I've struggled with some of the procedural things that the government have put into place in my beloved Canada. I've struggled with it, you know. But
the more draconian, totalitarian type measures, and I don't disagree with you. I often would say the same thing. If you want to stay home, you know, go into your basement and wear 4 masks. I'm not going to mock you, but you can't make me do that. Like, I don't want to do that. I want the choice to, you know, leave my house and go do what I'd like to do. And I have no problem wearing a mask if I go into a store or a restaurant. That's not a big deal. I don't see that as like an infringement on my civil liberties by any means. But I also think we have to give individuals some autonomy as it pertains to making choices, especially once we realize that this wasn't a virus that killed 10% of the people it infected, which was, you know, one of the crazy hyperbolic stats that was coming out of China at the time when we all shut down.
They couldn't walk it back. You know, listen, we all know politicians, they get up the same way that you and I do. They go to bed the same way that you and I do. You know, if they drink too much, they get drunk. If you don't sleep enough, you get tired, right? They're just people, right? They're people with, in some cases, more information. But they're also, their job is to stay in power and stay elected. And I wouldn't want that job, not in a million years. You know, so the good news is they're public figures and they get to be criticized. You know, there was tons of this stuff going on down here, but what went on in Canada around Christmas time with these, you know, MPs and these people flying to other countries but saying you got to stay at home, like if those people continue to be reelected in their seats, that's the people's problem, right? Because they have shown that, you know, do as I say, not as I do. And I think Canadians as a whole, including myself, are too trusting of people in a government authoritative role that their only reasoning for the decision is for the betterment of you. And some people are, right? But you can't forget where the bread is buttered. And, most politicians want to stay in power. They want to see their career escalate. That's wasn't always the case, and I don't know if it could ever be changed. But what my neighbor said, I look to my left and I look to my right, and I make the decision for myself, my community, and my family. And because somebody tells me something on the news with their finger like this, like they give a fuck, come on, fuck.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why Socrates decried democracy so much. The demagoguery, right? Like you get these people in making promises to the masses that they know they can't fulfill. And then, the fact that you're never actually governing with direction because you're sort of answering to the will of the people, which, will ebb and flow with whatever the media is telling them at the time to believe, or at least the majority of them, right? So,
right? The news was not profitable. I don't have the timelines right, so I don't want to be specific. But there was a time in jumping, Jerry, I've turned it off twice. Technology is not my thing. We had a problem getting me on this call. I don't know how to turn the ringer off. It's a real problem. But it's such a struggle for me and my mindset because of that. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I totally get it. Nick, I know you got calls. Your phone keeps ringing. We're going to wrap this up, but I want to thank you for doing this, man. Congratulations with Action and the New Entertainment Collaborative and everything you've done in Nashville. And you've been such a massive advocate, not only for the artists internationally, but also for our industry, and such a great spokesperson and ambassador for the industry, the Canadian industry in America and around the world. So hats off to you, man. You've done an amazing job, and it's been a real honor to watch you.
Thanks for that. And listen, I appreciate that very much. But what I have realized the most out of being not located in Canada anymore, living here, but still doing a lot of business in Canada and representing, Canadian artists, is that the community is really, really strong, right? People have differences of opinion, but it's continuing to grow, and the community is strong. The fan base is rapid, and I'm really proud to be a part of something that is growing in a country that deserves a larger spotlight on the talent that it is, uncovering. When you look at, the artists that are playing the larger buildings, headlining the larger festivals, we forget that it's about art. It's about how people feel. Like it is a business, but there's somebody on the other end of that song that it means something to them. They got married to it. They went through a breakup and they heard it. And, we can be removed from that. And I never want this format discounted for the creators of it in Canada. And that I will fight tooth and nail from, or tooth and nail for.
It's been a pleasure watching you in there swinging away, my friend. Thank you again.
Sean.